Hey, this is René, and in this video tutorial I will show you how you can write a program that creates a button in the chart, like you see here in the upper left corner, that is clickable and performs an action if it is clicked. For example, like it can close all open positions. So if you're interested, watch this whole video, but before we start, make sure to smash the like button. And click on subscribe if you like the content on this channel. Recommend it to your friends and family so more people can benefit from it, and it just helps YouTube in general to show and suggest these video tutorials to more people. But enough of this. Let's start right now with the programming. So whenever we want to program something in the MetaTrader 5, the best way to do it is to use the MetaQuartz language editor. Open it by clicking on IDE in the upper left corner or clicking on Tools, MetaQuartz language editor. This is already some of the code that we will write, but I will explain everything in detail now. So first of all, we will create a new program. Click on New in the upper left corner and then on Next. And then we can write a name for a program, for example, a button program. It doesn't really matter what you choose. Click on Next, Next, and Finish, and this will create the skeleton for an expert advisor for you. We can delete all these gray lines and the 3 property lines at the top because they will not affect the program at all. They are just information for either the programmer when it comes to the comments or the user of the program when it comes to the properties in the top. But we do not need it. It doesn't really affect the functionalities of the program. So first of all, we have to take care of the button. And we can create one button or multiple buttons in a program. And therefore, it is always a good idea to write a separate function for this. We already have 3 base functions inside of our program right now. There is the onTick function, the onDinit function, and the onInit function. These are so-called event handlers. So whenever there is an event like the activation of the program or a chart change, like a change of the time frame, the onInit or onDinit is called, and whenever there is a tick in the chart, the onTick function is called. We will get to know one more event handler in this tutorial, but first of all, we will create our own function to create a button. So this will be a new function, and whenever you write a new function, you have to go outside of any of these already existing functions. So on the global scale pretty much of the program, just go to the onTick function and give it some space. It doesn't really matter how much. You can have 1 blank line, 2 blank lines. Just it has to look good for you, so you have a good overview over your program. And then we first of all have to define a return value for the function. So when it is called, it can return a value. We could say it returns nothing. This would be void, but we can say it returns either true or false. So if we successfully created a button, we want to return we want to return true. So we can have a Boolean value as a return value because Boolean values can be either true or false. And then we have a name for the program for the function. We can say, for example, create button. Then we have these round brackets. These will be the parameters will be inside of these round brackets for this function, and we need this curly brackets for the body of the function. A function always looks like this. So this is the so-called signature of a function. We first of all have a return value, which is of type Boolean here. Then we have the name of the function, and we have the parameters. Even if a function does not have parameters, we need these round brackets here. And then we should always have a body for the function, so the MetaTrader has to know what the function, what the purpose of this function is and what it does. If you are interested in more information about basic topics like data types or function creation and everything like this, check out the links below this video and you will find a full and complete course about or on MetaTrader 5 programming, which is even suitable for absolute beginners. So when we want to create a button or any object, my preferred way of doing this is to take a piece of code from the documentation of mql5. So you can click F1 on your keyboard, or if you do not have this button or if you do not find it, you can click on Help and mql5 reference. Then you click on Index and you write object create. You will find an entry for the object create function. We will use this in a second, but first of all, I want you to click on this enum_object here. This is a link which links to a summary pretty much of all the objects that are available in MetaTrader 5 and that we can create through our program. At the bottom of this entry, we will find object_button, which is a button, obviously. And there we have several examples. So there's a lot of example code for a lot of different use cases. And you will find, if you watch closely, this button create function. And we can copy this whole function. But what I usually do is I just copy the body of this function. So everything that is inside of this, the curly brackets. So I take this, the whole code, which is inside of the curly brackets of this button create function, and I paste it into my function here. So I would ask you to do the same if you are following this tutorial. And what I do next is, usually when I write programs, I delete all the comments here, because I think the functions or the names of the function already say what it does, so we do not need all these comments here. But if you like them, I mean, you can keep them, of course, but I think it is a better way to just have these object set functions, which I will explain in a second, and yeah, not have all the comments. So, and I always like to have my brackets a little bit different than the example code. Okay, so if I click on compile, there will be a problem. There are a lot of errors and warnings, and this is because I did not copy the parameters here for the create button function, but we will implement them right now together. So first of all, let's have a look what we copied here. So this code is can be used to create buttons in the chart. First of all, this reset last error is just a function that resets the last error in the memory of the expert advisor. This is because here the get last error function is called, and this always returns the last error. And before you call this function, it is always a good habit to use the reset last error function, because then you can make sure that you receive the error that is caused by the object create function or the failure of this function. Here we try to create a object in the chart. If you want to create an object in a chart in MetaTrader 5, you always use this object create function. And if we have a look at the documentation again, just click F1 while your cursor is inside of this object create function name, you will find the entry for this object create function. You can see the return value is bool, so it can be either true or false, and this is why we can use it as a condition for this if statement. A if statement is a control structure that always has a condition in round brackets and then a body which is only executed if the condition is true. And this condition is the return value of this object create function, but it has this little exclamation mark in front of it, which means that the result is pretty much turned around. So if the object create function fails, then we will enter the body of this if statement and print the error message to the expert's journal. And the whole function, the whole create button function, will return false. This means pretty much the creation failed. Let's go back to the object create entry here in the documentation. You can see there are several parameters that we have to provide so the MetaTrader knows in which chart it has to create the object, what the object name is, what the object type is, and in which window. I mean, you can have several windows in one chart. For example, if we have a indicator that creates another window, I can show it to you real quick. Indicators, oscillators are great to show this. If we have a MACD, we then have a chart, which is all of this pretty much. And we have inside of this chart, we have two windows. This is the main window pretty much with the price, which is has window index 0. And we have this MACD indicator window, which will have index 1. So we have to decide if we want to create the button in the window 0 or 1. And this is why the object create function needs this information. So we can already start by saying the chart ID will be 0. This means that you want to create this button in the chart where the expert advisor is running. And we already said the sub window also has to be 0 because we want to create it in the main window pretty much where we can see the price action. Then we have to provide a name, a object name. And I would suggest that we make this our first parameter for the create button function. So we can go inside of these round brackets of the object create function, and I can make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to read. And we can say string object name. So this is a parameter of this function now. And whenever we call this function in one of our event handler functions later, then we have to provide a object name. And we will see this later on. But let's talk about the following two parameters here of this object create function. There's a date time and a double price parameter. So we can provide a time and a price, but for buttons this is not really suitable. So we just provide 0 here. This is pretty much a placeholder or a because we have to provide this parameter, we can just put 0 here. This is for some other objects, like for labels or texts in the chart. Then you can provide a time and a price to show where the text shall appear in the chart. But in this case, the button is defined using x and epsilon coordinates. So we will do this later on. Oh, and the third parameter of this object create function is the object type. So we provide object underscore button as a identifier to show that we want to create a button. And you can, again, you can read about this in the documentation, of course, if you go to the object create entry. So these lines, they will try to create a object button in the chart. And if it fails, we have a message and we end this create button function and return false. So we signal that it failed and we did not create a button. But if we were able to create a button, then the create button function is not finished here, and we go on with the following code. And there you can see a lot of object set integer or object set string function calls. And object set functions always change a specific property of an object. So you can see, for example, the object set integer function is built like this. It returns a Boolean value. This is not really relevant for us right now, but it always needs a chart identifier and a object name. So this will always be 0 for us and the object name of our button, because we always want to modify the same button which is currently located in the 0th pretty much chart, so the current chart where the program is running. Then as a next parameter, the object set functions always demand a property that you want to change. And in the documentation here, you will find a enumeration, which is also a link again, so you can click it, enum object property integer, and you will see all the identifiers. So these are all the identifiers that you could place here as a third parameter for the object set functions. And if you just go here, it already suggests you all the possible options. And the last parameter here is the value. So in this case, this would mean that we want to change the x distance, which is pretty much the x coordinate of this program. So we could say, for example, 10 of this button, sorry. So it would be the x coordinate. So if we start in the upper left corner, for example, or in the upper left corner, we would move 10 pixels to the right. So this button would be 10 pixels to the right. We will have a look if we try this out. What I always suggest is to create a parameter for this, like this. For example, int x and int y. Because here we can set the x distance to x and the y distance to y. And we can already go ahead and exchange all these names here with object name, because name is the parameter that was used in the, wait, let me show it to you again, in the sample code that we copied. So if we go back to the object button entry here, we will see in the sample code here, the name of the button was, so the parameter for the name was just called name, but we called it object name. So this is why we have a problem if we choose name here. There are two ways. You can either say object name and exchange all the name variables here with object name. This is just my personal preference because I like to call the object names object name variables object name, but you could also say, of course, that you call your parameter here a name, and then you do not have to exchange this. Okay, and what we can also do is we can take the 0 and exchange this chart ID variable with a value 0. This again was because the sample code worked with chart ID as a parameter for the function. As you can see here, it has chart ID as a parameter with a standard value of 0. But since we always want to create in the current chart and we do not have any case where we want to create in a different chart, we can just hard code 0 here for every function call. And there are still a lot of problems now, because here you can see all of these values for the function calls are also parameters in this sample code function. Here, they are listed here. And I usually do not use all of these because I think some of these are not really necessary. If you are interested, just read in the documentation. You will see a brief explanation for every single parameter here in the comments. But what we only want to change is the x coordinate, the epsilon coordinate, the width and the height. So we create two more parameters for our create button function. And make sure that you always take the correct data type. For example, the object name is a string data type variable because it will be a value, for example, like test, which is a text. So it has to be a string parameter. And these x, epsilon, width, and height, they are integer values because they are pixels pretty much. Okay, so if we compile this, we still have a lot of errors because there are several more parameters that can be changed, and we will not change all of them. For example, the corner defines if the button is based on the upper left corner, upper right, lower left, or lower right corner. We could have a parameter for this, but I usually like my buttons in the upper left corner, so I just hard code this. So I say corner left upper, because this is the identifier for the upper left corner. Then we have the text for the button. I suggest that we create one more parameter for this, which is again, of course, a string parameter, because this is a text. Then we can choose the font for this text. I usually do not do this because the standard font is just okay. And we can have a font size. I often just hard code this. Then we have a color. This is the text color. So we can, for example, say we want to have a color parameter here for a create button function, which can be the text color or color text. And we can already have a color for the background here. So we can say color text and color background for the background color. Then we can choose a border color. I usually do not do this. Then we can say if the button shall be in front of the price action or behind the price action. I usually have it in front of the price action, so we can just hard code true here as a value for this property. Then we have the state, where we can say false, because we want a button that is not clicked if it is created. We have to choose if the button is selectable, and if it is selected, please copy false here for the value for this property. Then we can say if it shall be hidden, we can say false or true. It just changes if the button is in the object list. For example, this button is hidden, so we have to click on list all to see it here. And we can delete it now. But if it is not hidden, it is already visible if you not click on list all. Doesn't really change the functionality, so I mean you could even erase this whole line. And then we have the Z order, which is not important for us right now. So we can just remove this line. So you can see I usually like to have just some of these parameters, because in the sample code you have all of these properties as a parameter, which makes the button create function like a really huge function with a lot of parameters. And I usually just choose the parameters that are important for me, and the rest, I like to hard code it in the function so it doesn't have to be changed. Yeah, and I have to choose color txt here because this was the name that I chose for this parameter. So now we have this create button function, and this is really great because now we can go to the onInit function of our program, and we can say create button here now, and you can see that we can call this create button function. And if we open the parentheses of this function, you can see all the parameters that we defined here. They are now listed as a little hint for us. So we can just go ahead and provide an object name, for example, button 1, like this. We can have a text like close. Then we have a X and Y value. We can say 50-50. I mean, you can just play around with it. No? It doesn't really matter what you put here. It just defines where the button is placed in the chart and how big it is. Then we have a color for the text. We can say color white, and a color for the black background. We can say color black or color red or color this, whatever you want to choose. And then you just close the parentheses and write a semicolon to end the line. And if we click on compile, this would take our MQ5 code file and create a EX5 executable file that we can then find in the MetaTrader, in the navigator under expert advisors. So we can see somewhere we should find button program, and if we drag it to any chart and click on OK, this will create a button. Okay, the color is not really perfect, so we can change this to color blue, for example. And if we compile this, the button is now blue. And somehow we see this grid line of the chart in front of the button. I think this is not cool. This is because we set object property back true, this means that the button is in the back of the chart. But if we put false here, this will create the button in front of the chart, like this. And this is pretty great already. What we should also do is, if we remove the program from the chart, the button is still there. So to fix this, we can say in the onDeinit function, which is called whenever the program is deactivated, we can say object delete. We can say chart ID 0, of course, and we can say button 1 shall be deleted. And as you can see here, we took this button 1 name already, or we used it already in 2 functions. This is why it is always a good idea. If you have buttons in the chart that are, for example, you have 1, 2, or 3 buttons, you will always have the same name for a specific button. So you can define this name. For example, we can say button close, and we write this hashtag define in front of it, and we can say, for example, this shall be named button close. So if we compile this, we now defined this word here pretty much. So we can just go here, print this button close. So this is just a, it's not really a variable, it's a combination of letters and numbers, and we can choose this because in the code it will automatically be exchanged with a value that we defined for this name here pretty much. So if we compile, you should now see that if we activate the program again, button program, and if we remove it from the chart now, you should see that the button is not removed. Okay, this is, I think, because the old button is still there, so we will have to remove it first. Yeah, maybe I can delete all the objects here. And if we activate the program again now and deactivate it, you should see the button is removed from the chart. So there is the button. If we remove it, it is gone. So this is how you can remove a button. Okay, so this works fine. We learned how we create a button. And what is really cool is we can just copy this. For example, we can say button close and button test, doesn't really matter. We can have another name and we can just copy this line and we can say we want to create the button test, which says test, and we want to have it below the first button. So we can say 51, for example, for the epsilon value, which is this axis of the chart, and we can also change the color, light pink, doesn't really matter. If we click on compile, you can see now this program should create 2 buttons in the chart. And if you are wondering why the buttons are not created directly if we add the program to the chart, this is because the chart is only updated on a new tick, I think. So to speed up the process, you can call the, I think it is chart redraw, the chart redraw function, because this will then force a redrawing of the chart and of all the objects inside of this chart. So what we have here is we have 2 buttons. We can click them. They will be in a clicked state, and we can click again, and they will be in a unclicked state. And if we want to add some logic to the button clicks, we have to add another event handler. And the event handler is on chart event. So please go to the reference to index and click on chart event or type on chart event. You will find the on chart event function here. We can just copy the signature of this on chart event function and paste it into our code. You can see this is just, as I said, the signature. So we can see the return value, the name of the function, and some parameters. And there is not a body already, so we have to add the body by writing these curly brackets. If we click on compile, this is important, there will be an error. And this is because there is a mistake in the documentation. I do not know why they don't update this, but this closing bracket of the parameters of this function is false. You have to remove it because otherwise you will have this error. If you remove it, everything works fine because this is the closing button for the parameter list. As you can see here, we have 4 parameters. And if we, for example, print these 4 parameters using the print function here, please do it in your own program and just write this print line inside of the body of this onChart event. You will see this onChart event function is triggered whenever there's a chart event. So if we watch the event, experts log here, we can clear it, and if we click the button, you can see there is a chart event triggered, and you can see all the parameters of this onChart event function are given to us pretty much by the system. So first of all, we receive the ID, then the so-called long parameter, the double parameter, and the string parameter. And these can be different for different types of objects, but for buttons, the ID or the ID for a button click should be 1, because I think this is the ID for chart event object click, I think. Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit advanced, but you can see we receive several parameters here, and the most important for us right now is the S parameter, because it is the name of the object or the button that is clicked. So what we can do here is we can check if, we can say if ID is chart event object click. So first of all, we check if any object was clicked. Then we can say, for example, we can exchange this print statement. We can say the S-param was clicked, like this. So, whoops, I should, oh yeah, please make sure that whenever you use text like this, make sure to wrap it in these quotation marks, because this is a way of showing the computer that this is a text. So now, since we have this print statement here and that we check if an object was clicked, we will now see that whenever we click this button, we will see the name of the button that was clicked, because this is now in the text output here. And we can now add some code. So we can check if the S-param is equal to, and then we can again use this defined name here. For example, button close. So if the S-param is equal to button close, make sure to use these two equal signs here to make a comparison, which then is can be used as a condition for this if statement. And then we can say that we want to do some action here. For example, like closing all open positions. And if we want to close all open positions, we first of all have to loop all open positions. And this is the loop that we can use to loop through all the open positions. This is a loop that I explained multiple times already in the tutorials on this channel. So if you're interested in understanding for loops and especially this loop that loops all the open positions, make sure to check out the previous tutorials and you will learn a lot about this this technique of looping all the open positions. And again, if you want a structured way of learning mql5 programming, you can check out the link below this video. You will find a complete course. So here I will just add the code which we can use to loop through the open positions like this, and then we can use the ctrade class to close all the positions that are currently open. So include trade mqh like this. Just copy this line, and yeah, this is we include a class to a program which we can use to do some trading operations like opening or closing or modifying positions. And we can now create objects of this class. For example, here I can create this trade object of class ctrade, and I can now use this to close positions. So I can say, for example, if trade position close, I have to provide a position ticket here. If this was successful, then I want to have a print statement and say position number, position ticket was closed, like this. If we compile this, this will now work, and this is already enough code implemented to take care of the closing of all open positions. So what we can do now is we can open some dummy positions pretty much that we want to close. Okay, like this. And you can see it realized that I clicked the test button because it was below the sell button, I think. And if we now click this close button, you can see what happens, or maybe we look at the trades. You can see all the open positions are closed. And we see the documentation of this in the experts tab here. So the button close was clicked and all these 5 positions are closed. And now the button is in a clicked state, and we would have to click it again to bring it back to the unclicked state. This is a little bit unsexy, I think, so we can take care of this. Make sure that after you closed all the open positions, you change the button state back to false. So just use the object setInteger function. This is the function that we used a lot in the createButton function already. But you can, of course, use it in any part of your program. So we can say chart ID is 0 again. The name is button close for the object that we want to change. And we want to change the object prop state, and we want to set it to false, like this. So if you compile this, if we open some dummy positions again, for example, several buy, several sell positions, doesn't really matter. And if we now close them, you will see the button is automatically set to a false or unclicked state. So if you click it, it is clicked now, and positions are closed and the button is unclicked. If you want this a little bit faster, you can call the redraw chart again, or chart redraw function again here. But yeah, doesn't really, yeah, I mean, you can keep it, you can erase it, doesn't really matter, doesn't really affect the program. So this is how you can create a button and make it close all the open positions. And yeah, I think this is super cool. And yeah, let me know what you think about this in the comments below. And maybe you can give me a suggestion if I shall modify this program a little bit more and maybe add some functionality to the second button. So if you want to see something there, you can just leave me a comment. I will react to it and maybe make another video tutorial on button clicks in MetaTrader 5. But for now, maybe I can sum up the most important parts. I usually like to define the names of my buttons at the very top using this #define method here. You can just choose any name for this button pretty much, or for this definition. This is the name for the definition, and this is the name for the button. And then we can use I usually create a create button function, which is built like this here. It has several parameters of different types where we define the most important parameters of this button. Then we try to create a button using the object create function. And if this was successful, then we change some of the properties of this button. For example, it is really important to define the position of the button, because if we do not do this, the button will be placed, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we can try it, but it doesn't look good, I think. Yeah, you can see it is just some button in the upper left corner. So it doesn't really make sense. Oh, and what I forgot is I have to delete the second button, of course. button test in the onDinit function. Okay, so we define several important properties for this button. For example, the position, which is defined by the X and Y parameter, and then we have a width and a height. And then we can define the base corner and the text in the button, the font size, the color of the button, and just play around with it. I mean, you can change the font size, you can change the size of the button, you can change the color of the button, just play around with it. Then we have some more properties that I usually do not make a parameter for the create button function, but I mean, you could make it a parameter. If you want to define it as a parameter, just you can just add it to this list. For example, you can say boolean is back like this, and then you can use this as a property for this object prop back property of the button. And yeah, if you change the list of parameters, you will of course have to change the amount of information that you give in the onInit function if you call the create button function. But I will just redo this change because I usually do not do this. Yeah, okay, so we have this create button function created, and then we can use it. Usually you want to use it in the onInit function because you do not want to create a button with every single tick. Just doesn't make sense. And you can now use the parameter list here of the create button function to define the exact button that you want to create. And then, in the onDinit function, make sure to delete the buttons from the chart, because if you delete the program, you do not want to keep the buttons in most cases. And then we have the onChartEvent function. This is the function that captures the chart events, like for example, the button clicks. And there is an ID for every chart event, and then you can check what button was clicked using the S parameter, the string parameter, which is for button clicks usually the name of, for any chart event, pretty much the name of the object that that caused this chart event. Then we have this cTrade class. Make sure to include the trade.mql5 because otherwise you cannot use it. And then we have a loop to loop through all the open positions, and we close every position that we can find using the position close function, which is part of the cTrade class. And then, we just make the button unclicked by updating the button state. And this is it. This is how you can create buttons in the chart, as many as you want, and provide functionality to any single button. For example, if you want the test button to do something, you could say else if s_param equals button test, and then you can place the code that shall be executed if the button test is clicked here. And this is it. Let me know if you like this video in the comments. Let me know what you want me to add to this program. And I think we will see each other in the next video. Until then, have a great time. Good trades. Bye-bye.